Hello, everybody. It is great to be here and great to have Dave and Ramesh. Nice to see you. This has been on our calendar for some time. I recall looking at a frozen landscape and howling winds, so things are certainly brighter since last we spoke. But Dave, thanks so much for making this happen.
Oh, my pleasure.
Great. So I guess to start off, I suspect that our audience knows you at this point, Dave, and I hope you'll pardon me by suggesting that they know who I am. But Ramesh, you may be a new face to some of our friends that are watching today. So if you could maybe start off by sharing just a bit about your background, that would be great.
Fantastic. Thanks, Fraser. Dave, good to see you again. Hi, everyone. I'm Ramesh Raskar. I'm professor at MIT. And a lot of my work is at the intersection of machine learning, imaging, computer vision, digital health, and so on. And I kind of always have a foot in academia and also in the industry. So, often launching startups from a group at MIT. Also took a leave from MIT to start a AI for Impact group at Facebook. For a couple of years in Menlo Park. And also last year, I was at Apple on the data privacy team. So it's just wonderful to be here.
Fantastic. And the first thing I'd like to know, and please feel free to be as expansive or as concise as you like, but basically I want to know what's interesting to you both in AI. Maybe Ramesh, if you can first speak a little bit more about the changes in the underlying technology. And Dave, I think maybe a little bit more in the commercial applications. I really just want to know what's keeping you both awake at night.
Yeah, I mean, it's, the progress in AI and machine learning is just breathtaking. But maybe what's more exciting is where it's getting applied. Because I think for the longest time, we used it to understand about machines and how the world works. But now we are really targeting, humans and human behavior. And, in any AI effort, you basically have three parts: capture, analyze, and act. And, as you can imagine, it's easy to capture how the machine behaves or, how a car behaves, but it's very difficult to capture how a human behaves. And nowadays we think about maybe, click-throughs or specific data that's coming from hospitals or your credit card transactions. But as we go forward, we are being very direct with human behavior in terms of capturing it, whether it's through chatbots, whether it's through audio, video, and so on. So that's the capture. And then there's analyze. Many of you know about classic progress in machine learning. And analyze was always about kind of memorization or finding patterns, but human behavior is very complex. So analyzing it also requires techniques like, self-supervised or, unsupervised learning, or things like self-play in software. And also, how do you act? How do you engage humans? And that's, it's just a lot of emerging areas. The old way of doing it was just targeting. But now it's all about how do you interact and how do you engage as well. So to me, I think the real excitement about AI is not just the way AI is progressing as a field, but also how it's getting applied to human behavior.
Fantastic. And Dave, how about you?
Yeah, I'll pick up exactly where Ramesh left off in terms of the use cases that are completely taking off. It's funny, back when I was, first graduated from MIT and I was training neural networks, and I was one of maybe a handful of people in the entire world that were trying to train neural networks. And if you told anyone that you were a data scientist working with deep learning, they're like, I don't care. I just literally did not matter to the world. And now it's inverted so much that if you go to where Ramesh is at MIT and where COVID doesn't help this, but if you look around at this backlog of companies that want to hire everybody even vaguely aware of how to do this, it's just a complete inversion. And part of that is because the tools have gotten so much easier to use that you can get tremendously more done per data scientist. And then of course the use cases that actually work, back then the the number of parameters that were in a neural net would be on the order of a couple million. And now you have 170 billion, and within a year or two, it'll be a trillion. And so just the raw horsepower that's behind these algorithms is so much bigger that they can now very easily do things like recognize human voice intonations and emotions, which is a real live use case, or recognize the movement of your hand. There's a really cool demo where you can train it to recognize when somebody puts their hand into a mailbox and sticks in a letter versus when they reach under or around it and puts a bomb on it. And you can train it with just 15 or 20 examples, and then it can sit there and for the rest of its existence give you an alert anytime that one action happens on every mailbox in the country for virtually no cost. I'm like, wow, that's something that just could not have existed a few years ago that suddenly makes total sense. There's actually a real live public company, ShotSpotter, that uses the sound that comes from a gunshot, goes into microphones that are on the light poles, uses AI to then triangulate and recognize that exact type of sound from all the backfiring cars and everything else. And then not only that was a gunshot, but where exactly it happened, pinpoint down to 3 feet. Like that's another application that, a couple training examples and it learns, and then deployable for the rest of mankind. So the use cases that are really taking off, though, are all about human experience. A lot of them are in sales and customer relationship management, where a very, very practical use case that's taking off is call center alignment, where based on everything we know about a person, try and get them into a call center talking to somebody that's most like them, and they'll instantly bond. And that's a very trainable and incredibly huge amount of lift in that use case. Another one, a lot of people are talking about, what does it feel like right before strong AI comes into the world and the singularity and the massive amount of change that comes with that? What does it look like right before that? One of the things we're seeing now is this Uberization of many, many industries where you have a large workforce, like all the Uber drivers, and where they go next and what they do next is determined by AI. And so the marching orders for the workforce are actually coming from AI-driven algorithms and not coming from their boss and not from a human operator. And that's applying to not just Uber. Uber's the easiest example, but we've got portfolio investments in many categories, and there are at least 30, 40 examples we've seen where different types of workforce have been Uberized. And then what you should be doing right now comes from an AI algorithm. And those are just crazy high growth. So I can go on, there's many.
No, for sure, but I do have a few more questions, so I'm sure there'll be plenty of ammunition. So recently I was at a lecture conference, and the head of OpenAI, or the chief scientist, Ilya Sutskever, he kind of made this very dramatic point, I would say, for a data scientist anyway. And he said, all practical advances in machine learning in the last decade have come from training deep neural networks on increasingly large and increasingly precise data sets. So Ramesh, I'd love your reaction to this, given that you alluded specifically to neural networks earlier. And then Dave, I guess maybe tell me if that even matters in the context of how we experience the technology.
I think Ilya's statement from OpenAI is partially true, at least looking back. But we really want to think about AI. The difference between software and AI is that software and programming is like cooking, and AI is like raising a child. When you are cooking, you have ingredients, you have a procedure, you have if then else, and then in the end you get something yummy that you cooked. Raising a child, on the other hand, is not about a procedure. It's not like the if then else. I mean, the way we raise our child, and those of you who have children, is we show them. We let so-called supervised learning. We say, hey, this is how you eat, this is how you talk, and then they learn from us, right? Or the children are sometimes semi-supervised. We eat with our spoons, but they're eating with their hands. And sometimes when you're not watching them, they're still learning, which is kind of just self-supervised learning. And probably the most common form is reinforcement learning, which is when the child is trying to do something, they'll try it a few times, it won't work, and something will work, and we'll say, ah, so great, Tommy, that's great. And we encourage them, and we encourage behavior we want them to reinforce, and we discourage otherwise. And this reinforcement is another form of learning. So as you can see, I mean, most of the terminology actually in machine learning is borrowed from child psychology. Supervised, unsupervised, semi-supervised, reinforcement, all those things, including curriculum learning and so on. So as you know, I agree with Ilya that this is how it has been in the past, that, hey, it's completely supervised learning. But even if you don't go to strong AI, even if you are at weak AI, which is kind of task-specific AI, we're going to expand to all these other areas of how we learn. So what does that mean in a concrete way? I mean, if you're building a self-driving car, you're not going to say, hey, let me get the car into multiple accidents, and from all the accidents, I'm going to learn, right? So you just don't have the luxury of the car, many cars that you have on the ground just failing. So you have to use some other tools like simulation, but your simulations are going to be never complete. That's why you hear Tesla cars, getting damaged because of other human behavior or strong lights and so on, because, even the best self-driving car company cannot look at all the edge cases, and so on. So I think there is some truth to kind of this notion of supervised learning, but the real kind of excitement is treating AI like raising a child. And we'll see how we can go from there. And the second angle to that is, so far it's kind of data in, data out type of problems. But now we have other things, some real world observations, which could be human behavior, it could be physics, and like if you want to train a car to drive in Boston's snow and fog, simulating that is not easy. So physics of the real world is also very important. So I would say the human behavior and the physics is something that makes AI pretty exciting, and so I don't completely agree with what Ilya is saying going forward.
Fantastic. It's nice to have a little bit of controversy. Dave, how about you?
Yeah, I think the reason the deep neural nets are taking over is because they've had some incredible breakthroughs, and so it's kind of leapt to the front of the pack. It doesn't mean the rest of the pack won't catch up. They can have incredible breakthroughs too. But as of right here, right now, you have this really interesting virtuous cycle where the neural nets years ago would, when they were 3 or 4 layers deep, they were incapable of incredible things like handwriting recognition or all kinds of very practical applications. But if you added that 5th layer, the complexity went through the roof, and they would just never converge. They would just never learn anything. They would just stop completely. And that kind of stayed that way for a decade. And then a couple of really amazing algorithmic breakthroughs kind of popped on the scene to give them kind of an intermediate way to learn half steps so that they could get deeper. Now, the human brain thinks in 7 layers. So each cortical microcolumn is 7 layers deep. So each little unit of thought is 7 layers, and then they transmit to the next unit. And so there's a lot of thought that, beyond 7 layers, you start to get into human level thinking. And these things are doing 9, 10, 11, 12, sometimes 20 plus layers now. So they can start to do things that a human actually can't do. Well, they still can't do a lot of things a human can do. So I'm not implying anything like that. But in terms of mapping complicated spaces to outcomes, unbelievably powerful all of a sudden. At the same time that was happening, the NVIDIA GPUs that these run on, or all the other GPUs, just took off in terms of the amount of parallel horsepower you can throw at these problems. And you saw NVIDIA's stock was the best performing stock in the world, I think it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, just absolutely skyrocketed just because of this use case. And around the same time, all the self-driving cars suddenly could drive. Like, why could a car never drive before? Suddenly it can drive. What's the difference? The difference is that exact same breakthrough. So all of the image recognition that goes into those cars and allows them to turn the right way at the right time, with you think about all the variety of situations that could emerge in front of a car. It's just an astronomical number of things that a human does to drive a car. And all of a sudden, it was possible to do computationally, but that's the exact same breakthrough that enabled it. So all of that is a virtuous cycle that pushes the deep learning neural nets into incredible terrain. That doesn't mean the other approaches won't have those types of breakthroughs. But right here, right now, yeah, you're right. That one type of AI has really taken off and is kind of dominating the business scene.
Fantastic. And as investors, we at Vestigo, we've got a strong tendency towards optimism, hopefully around AI. We're excited about the new products that can be created, the aspects of human drudgery that are going to be eliminated by this, the increase in safety across different aspects of our economy. But we're also well aware how endemically disruptive progress tends to be. So I guess, maybe we can talk a little bit about risks that you see due to advances in AI. And Dave, I'd love you to take the first crack at this.
Yeah, well, I think I'm surprised how many people are aware of the risks now. I didn't really see that coming, but I think when you get Elon Musk saying it's the biggest risk in all of the world, worse than nuclear weapons by orders of magnitude, then people listen to Elon Musk, so suddenly there's a large swath of society that's aware of this. I think the AI community was aware of it 20, 30 years ago. But I think most of the risks are related to strong AI. So what happens is when these things start to create themselves, so the next iteration is created by the prior iteration, then the progress accelerates at an incredible pace. It's clear that laws and regulations are moving at a linear pace. They're not really accelerating at all. And technology is moving at an exponential pace. And so anyone who knows linear and exponential things that have happened in the past knows that that you cannot expect regulation to ever catch up to the rate of change. And so that scares a lot of people. I think the debate is, when are you going to have strong AI, or the last iteration of AI is developing the next iteration of AI and the whole thing accelerates. Some people think that it'll never happen. Some people think that's 20 years in the future. Some people think it's as little as 3 years into the future. So your feeling of risk is definitely tied to that timeline. And it's pretty complicated to try and estimate when you have to worry about certain things. I'm not worried about a heck of a lot that I see in the world today in terms of AI being a problem. It's the strong AI turning point in the future that becomes the problem.
And Ramesh, how does our sort of Freudian AI child avoid becoming adult AI Frankenstein?
I think some of the points that Dave is making about transitioning from weak, which is task-specific AI, to a general strong AI is, I think there are many stages in between, and as we get to this moment of singularity, as a lot of people call it, nearly every aspect of humanity will see a change. But in between, let's say singularity is about 10 years out, let's say 2030. Let's say 2030 is a time when a computer can do almost everything that a human can do. I think between now and then, we can just assume that there's pretty much nothing stopping technology. I mean, every technology company will continue to get bigger. Every investment you make in using technology to either store, analyze, predict, and manipulate is going to expand. So there's no stopping of that. And if you just kind of think about a good kind of a metric for that is, I think, like maybe 2 years ago, AI was where you can replace 1 second of human thinking. So anything that takes us about 1 second of human intelligence. So I look at an image and recognize it, or I hear a word and I understand its translation. Anything that takes about 1 second of human brain, an AI can do. Right now, we are about 3 seconds. Anything that takes about 3 seconds of analysis is an AI can do. But once we get to kind of 5 seconds or 1 minute of human brain, so think about kind of listening to a story and summarizing it, or taking an abstract business plan and creating a slide deck for it, right? This is something that you cannot do in a matter of a minute. How long will it take AI to get there? Is an interesting one. So I think for us, mere mortals, who only have biological evolution, that's a good metric to kind of check. Like, are we at a 1 second, 3 second? But because once AI reaches roughly at a 1 minute mark, we can pretty much say, AI can do most of the things that humans can do. That means that skilling becomes important. Are we using AI for the right challenges becomes important. And I think we can, all those competing forces, market forces, democratic forces, are going to play out only if it's a very open society. So if you're not in an open society, it's quite likely, like Dave mentioned, Elon Musk fears that certain nation states or certain powerful organizations could use it in a terrible way, like bioterrorism or nuclear energy. So I think the Frankenstein would be if there are not enough competing forces to kind of cancel each other out and make sure it's being used for solving problems in climate and transport and overcoming poverty and maybe even democracy is even stronger, or the other way around.
Thanks. That's extremely helpful. If a little dark. The last question I want to ask you both is around why we need to stay optimistic about the future, because future is coming one way or another. But the three of us don't get together that often, so if you want to ask each other anything after you've answered my questions, please feel free. But I think Dave, if you can talk about why you're still optimistic, that'd be great.
Well, yeah, I think, well, first of all, the media sells impressions by creating drama. And so media is always going to try and make as much trouble as possible to sell more impressions. And so that always worries society, and it's a scary kind of dynamic, or at least intentionally tries to make people scared. But if you look at the history of technology and the way we live today compared to any time in the real world history, humanity is so much better off in each successive time period because of technology. And so I think COVID was a nice wake-up call in, aside from all the bad sides of COVID, a great wake-up call in how we need science and we need technology, and that without it, diseases run rampant, and it's not the way you want to live. And there's a tendency to forget that. As our society gets more comfortable, there's a tendency to forget that. I don't think AI is going to be any different from that. Fundamentally, what got me into AI as a teenager is this idea that we'll have an abundant ability to manufacture anything and everything for every human being on the planet. Like every single person can live the same lifestyle as a Bill Gates when we have AI. And I think that's our destiny. I mean, I think that there is a likelihood of abuse between here and there, like there has been with virtually every prior technology. But after that time period passes, it's a net good. But you got to think in terms of the incredible upside that comes from having AI-driven robotic manufacturing of any product that you want, or anything that we create as a society being done abundantly for absolutely everybody. And that destiny is just not that far in the future. One of the great kind of, if I had to choose when to live, a lot of people are nostalgic about, boy, wouldn't it be great to live back in the roaring 20s or the 50s, everything was so simple. But I would want to be younger, not older. And I would choose to be kind of a 14, 15-year-old right now, so that I'm not kind of late to the party, but I'm right in the middle of the party when all this abundance comes into existence. And I also think that the rate that biotech is moving, there's a great collision coming right now. Probably a lot of it will happen at the new Schwarzman Center at MIT, where biotech meets AI. And the ability to predict what changes in body chemistry or in genetics have what effect, what genotype to phenotype mapping, or so what effect this has, that is coming very soon. And it's very likely that will create longevity that may go to extreme numbers. I don't want to get into that conversation, but you could talk about a generation that lives a lot longer than any prior generation, and effectively 100-year-olds that are like today's 30-year-olds, and then beyond that. And that I think is very, very likely. And I'll be a little bit too old for it, but it'll happen to probably people that are teenagers today. So I mean, there's a lot to look forward
to. Ramesh, do you care to follow that?
I mean, I'm very optimistic. And I teach at MIT. I teach an AI for a venture class, and the startups that come out of my class. I mean, you can just see the kind of the energy, the passion, and this young talent. And they're all out there doing exactly what Dave said. Starting companies, thinking about solving some of the biggest problems. At the same time, they're highly lucrative, financially. So I think, as I said, I think the market forces and kind of human behavior forces should take us in the right direction as long as we have an open conversation about it. We do have a point of this 2030, I'm just going to pick like about 10 years from now, of an event horizon where we don't know what's going to happen beyond that. Because it becomes an exponential, because it becomes recursive, and things can kind of take off. And what we're going to see over the next 10 years is certainly the problems that we couldn't solve, like Alzheimer's or cancer or climate, or thinking about how to create a fridge that cleans itself, or you never have to kind of meatless meat, and all these things suddenly will get solved because you have amazing progress in AI. And so it's just one of those worlds we live in over the next 10 years that is just kind of going to be very utopian. What happens after 2030? Unfortunately, nobody knows, because by definition, it's the event horizon. So, but at least for the next 10 years, it's the most amazing ride of our humanity.
Fantastic. And you have my email address, so when these lucrative student-founded AI companies come out, you will not lose it. Would love to have some conversations. Well, I think we're coming up on the half hour, but I've had a ton of fun. I'm confident that everyone tuning in has learned something, and now that we ended on a positive note, have enjoyed this immensely. And I'm definitely excited for the year ahead and the decade ahead. So stay safe, and I'll look forward to doing this again.
Yeah, thanks, Frederick. It's always fun. Ramesh, great to see you.
Thanks a lot. Good to see you.
Awesome. Bye, guys.
Bye.